It's time. Hello and welcome to Into the Liminal Abyss Paranormal Podcast. I am your host, Shatan Noir, and today I am here talking with Rocky Freeze, and I'm going to let Rocky introduce himself because I just met him here at the Michigan Ghost Coast Paranormal Convention, and I think what he has to talk about is really awesome, and I'm going to let him give you a description of what his research and his background is.
Hi, my name's Rocky Freeze. Actually, my background many years was in electronics, but here since I've retired, I've got quite a bit of interest in doing some ancient history, if you will, especially in the Michigan area. A lot of it started with, if many of you are familiar with the Curse of Oak Island TV show, all right? In that, obviously if you watch the show, they want you to kind of believe that everybody's searching for pirate treasure and things. What a lot of us who have done research on the Oak Island area have found is that there is a lot of history. The treasure really is in that ancient history of ancient mariners who came over here from the other side of the Atlantic over the many thousands of years ago. Well, we also know that a lot of them came over here to do the copper mining up in the Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And so I've always been trying to do some more research to try to tie these things together a little bit more. And in doing that research, some of the things I've done is look at a lot of the water levels that have occurred over time. If you look at like the Atlantic side over by Nova Scotia, over the years, the Atlantic has actually risen over the years, and right now it's at a high point. If you look at the Great Lakes, it's just the opposite. A lot of the waters were actually higher and have gone down because as the glaciers melted, okay, and receded, you also had isostatic rebound of the ground coming up. So what that's done is it's changed our shorelines. The lakes did not look like they do today many, many years ago. So if you go wandering out in the woods someplace, let's say the middle of the UP, you may find areas that at one time were underwater and were a shoreline. And so the thing to do is to look for anything that might be evidence of potentially these ancient mariners. It could be things like mooring stones, a lot of things like that you want to look for type of stuff to kind of show that, yeah, there were people here traveling at one time, whether it be to or from the copper mines, we don't know, and that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of the research I do is to kind of, to try to look for those signs, identify these ancient shorelines and that type of thing.
So now you said your initial interest was in the history or the Curse of Oak Island.
The TV show, right?
So now you had we were having a conversation yesterday, and you were telling me that the oak trees that were actually originally grew on Oak Island, how it got its name, are not actually North American oak trees.
No, they're not. They were oak trees that actually originated over in the northern African area, if you will. And a lot of them at the time of the Phoenicians, if you will. They're real tall canopy type oaks, and the reason they were planted on the island is they were markers for these mariners. As they came from afar, they would see these oaks and know that is where they needed to go to the islands. And again, at one time, Oak Island was not an island. When I talked about the water levels, Oak Island was actually a peninsula off of Nova Scotia at one time. A lot of us, our belief is what the real treasure in Oak Island is it's an ancient tomb for these mariners. And the way they never actually dug and buried anything, they actually entered horizontally from the waters as they approached it, because again, it was not an island, it was a peninsula that was higher. There was a lot of these caverns that they came in horizontally, created this tomb, eventually buried it. What a lot of people on Oak Island talk about the money pit was actually an exit point that they used to close it up as they exited on there. And then over the thousands of years, as the water level rose, nobody knew about these caverns. And if you look at a bathymetric charts of the waters around there, you can actually see where some of these cavern entries are.
Cool.
And those are the kinds of things I'm looking for in the Great Lakes area also, is those type of signs that we had for the travelers in this area.
So now, you said about the mooring stones and
Yep.
stuff. So can you give me a description of what you've found or what you look for when you're in the UP and you're looking for mooring stones? Are you looking for like possibly Petoskey stones or coral
No,
formations?
a mooring stone is going to usually something that's a little bigger, heavy, and it's actually going to have probably like a, I don't want to say a drill, but they've actually created a hole in it and stuff. It's kind of like an anchor stone, more of an anchor stone if you were for a ship or a boat type of stuff. And to find one of those out on dry land somewhere indicates that, yeah, at one time there was water and there were ships at the time, that kind of stuff. They're hard to find. A lot of times they're buried underwater, but if you're looking for things, you'll sometimes run across them.
So now we were talking yesterday about, and I've heard this mentioned before, the copper tablets.
Oh, the Newberry tablets?
Yes, the Newberry
okay.
tablets, and
Yeah. A lot of people have argued as to whether or not the Newberry tablet and statues were real or not. And the Smithsonian had written them off, but several people have done research. Scott Walter is one who did a whole episode on it in his TV show and pretty much verified that, yeah, this looks good. But one of the things we do know about the Newberry tablet and the statues is they were discovered in roughly, I think it was 1869 or 1879, I think it was, and out in a field. And a gentleman by the name of Barry Fell, who was an early person who did a lot of work with ancient languages and stuff, actually was able to decipher the language on this tablet as early Minoan. What's interesting is when you look at the date that the tablet was found, 1879, we did not even know as a civilization about the Minoans, if you will, until like the early 1900s. We did not understand their language or was able to decipher it until the 1950s. So when I look at that, you say, here you have a tablet that was discovered in 1869 or 1879. We did not know the language until 1950. How could somebody create that as a fake?
Exactly.
Time difference. You know, that's kind of where my head is on that. But aside from that, let's make the assumption that the Newberry tablet is real. If anybody knows where Newberry is in the Upper Peninsula, it's kind of right smack dab in the middle of the UP.
Yes.
And it's the copper mines are more up by the Keeneland Peninsula, Isle Royale, up in those areas type of thing. There's no copper, a lot of copper in the Newberry area. So I've often said, okay, why Newberry? Why is this important, if you will, for something like the tablet? Why would it have been left there? Was it people who were traveling to and from the mines, those kinds of things? And again, why that location? So when I was doing my water research, I've identified that the area around Newberry was actually a peninsula at one point in time.
Oh.
The rest of the UP, kind of east and south of there, was actually underwater. The early waters that were created after the glaciers, Lake Minoan for one, actually drained down through what is now the Tequanauan Falls, Tequanauan River Valley area into what is now Lake Michigan. And as a result of that, that whole Newberry area was a peninsula. So if anyone wants to kind of investigate or look around and stuff, you may find potentially maybe some evidence of travelers and stuff in that area.
Now you said that the language on the tablets was yes.
Mm-hmm.
So were they able to translate what it actually said or meant?
Yes, and to be honest with you, my memory's not good. I couldn't tell you what that is. There's a lot of writings on it. If anybody wanted to do some research the gentleman named Barry Fell, who's no longer with us. He did a lot of the early translations on it and stuff, and it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So now, have you, I know that you do a lot of ancient maritime research. Have you found any shipwrecks or...
I don't do too much with shipwrecks. I collaborate with other people who are looking to identify some and things in the lakes. In fact, recently I've talked to some individuals who sent me some side scan sonar images of some wrecks and that kind of stuff, but I only focus on those more of an interest. My interest again is more some of the ancient shorelines. Another example is here in western Michigan, in the lake, as we know of Lake Michigan today, the shorelines are not where they were. They were inland almost 20, 30, 40 miles from where they were today at one time. And even some of the archaeologists have found things like some ancient furnaces and things like this type of thing on what have been the ancient shorelines and stuff.
Cool. Now, we were talking yesterday, and I had brought up the subject of the Civil War gold that is supposedly buried in Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? And
That one, because I am from Muskegon, that whole show and that thing, hit me quite personal, if you will, because I love Muskegon, I love the history of Muskegon. Um, I don't ever want to say that what people are doing is wrong, because what I may be doing is wrong, and I appreciate everybody's opinions on stuff. I guess I was a little concerned about the show, and that I think the History Channel probably went a little more towards trying to get viewers and an interest, if you will, as opposed to really understanding some of the facts. I did look at a lot of the things they were showing on the show, like the early railroad on the beach and that kind of stuff. And a lot of that stuff, unfortunately, I'm afraid, I don't think really happened. And I hope if someone could prove me wrong, that's great. But I did look at a lot of those things, and I think unfortunately, I'm just a little concerned that maybe the methods and the things they're talking about with the gold, I don't think really applied here.
So, because I do remember them talking about that there was a railroad track that went,
I'll give you an example.
There was a buried locomotive.
Well, yeah, and actually, I've had somebody who told me they have a photograph of this buried locomotive, which could very well be. But the problem is, I think if you look at the way the shoreline is here, if they were to run a track that went from Ferrysburg to Muskegon along the beach, one place they would have had to cross is the channel, what we now know as Mona Lake. It's a channel that back in the day was actually used by smaller boats for the farmers, for the agriculture, when they were shipping agriculture in and out of what I think was called, I don't think it was called Black Lake, I forget right offhand, but it was what now today called the Mona Lake. If there was indeed a railroad that had gone across that channel, there would have to be some evidence of a bridge or something there.
Exactly.
It would have to be a bridge that was either movable for the shipping traffic that came in and out of that harbor, and I don't believe anybody has found that. So to have a railroad go across the beach there just does not fit.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So, wow, that's really interesting. When you actually, it's one thing to watch the show, but when you actually do the research and you actually take a deeper look in.
There's one episode where they talked about how Hackley potentially brought this railroad line directly into his sawmill area, if you will. And they showed a picture of the railroad spur and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you were to zoom out on any of the old maps of the town and that kind of stuff, that railroad line fed all of the mills along the shores of Muskegon Lake, not just Hackley's.
Yeah, that would seem like, because I know that most railroad companies were privately owned, and each line was privately owned, so it wouldn't make sense just to take it to one mill. You would think that they would have a stop along.
Yeah. And that railroad line actually did come down to the Grand Haven area, but it went much inland east, if you will, up on the east side of where I talked about Mona Lake, and not on the west coast side and stuff. And it was a line that was used by all the lumber mills at the time to carry things back and forth. They also had, there was a early electric train that was put in that ran, and it ran on the beaches, but it ran on the beaches more in town, not the entire length of the beaches. And it was more of like a sightseeing and like a trolley type electric train that they had at one time on there. Stuff.
Like a leisure.
A lot of pictures you'll find in history are pictures of those tracks and those trains and that type of thing too. As far as the locomotive on the beach, I'm still doing some research. If anybody ever runs across a photograph, which I was told at one time was published, of showing this engine on the beach, I'm curious to see a little bit more about it, because I'm kind of thinking it might be a locomotive that might have been there, was a part of the later foundries that were doing mining on the shores for sand.
So if somebody does come across this photo, how can they get it to you?
Again, my name's Rocky Freeze. The easiest way is if anybody uses Facebook, I'm on Facebook. You can feel free to contact me there, send me information, that type of thing. So.
Okay, cool. Because I would love to see that picture too. If anybody,
And again, and I'm not trying to say that, if these guys are off, doing a lot of work, researching and looking for the gold and that kind of stuff, I wish them all luck. I hope they're right. I hope they find that kind of stuff. I just try to look at what I see, and then go look at the facts and the history to kind of say, is this real or not real? Are we looking at it the right way? Are we looking at it the wrong way? That type of thing.
So it seems like our metal sources, that's kind of what drew everyone to the Upper Peninsula, ancient cultures. you know.
Think about it. I mean, the belief is that our copper in Michigan is what fed the Bronze Age.
Okay.
There were tens of millions of tons of copper were mined out of the Great Lakes area that they cannot account for here in North America, but they can account for it overseas in the Mediterranean. In fact, nowadays they have ways of actually testing metal to determine where it was actually mined and come from, and they have tested some of that metal, and it does appear to have come from the Great Lakes.
Yeah, because it's a purity level.
Yep,
that
it's the highest purity. In
Yeah,
the world. Yep.
Michigan, the Upper Peninsula produces the highest purity, which is really cool when when you think about it, that we have a precious resource that everybody else wanted in the dawn of civilizations. That they were willing to come so far for it. So that's pretty cool. So let's see. I know we were talking about. You said that there's a conference in the UP every year.
There's a group. Yeah, there's a group called the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society. Their role is to take things that are found that has to do with ancient peoples, and help do research. Collaborate with different people to do the research on all this kind of stuff. And they have a yearly conference that's held in Escanaba, where they discuss a lot of these findings and that kind of stuff, if you will.
So that would be, I think I have that weekend open.
Yeah, it's in October. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but it's in October.
I will probably have to take a trip to the UP and go to that conference because that just sounds too cool.
It's some fascinating stuff. I mean, they don't talk just about the Great Lakes. It started with the Great Lakes because the gentleman that started the group, Fred Rydholm, was one of the early people that did a lot of research and writings and publications on the copper mining in this area. But we have people that talk about all the different ancient things that have happened all around the world, from South America to Asia, all over, particularly, and it's extremely interesting.
Cool. And so that is, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be so cool.
I hope you go. I think you would enjoy it.
I think I would too. So that's definitely going to be put on my calendar as go to this. So now I know that you are primarily looking at the ancient coastlines, and so is there anything that you're working on now that
my biggest area right now is trying to learn more about the UP area and what it looked like and where potentially people could have traveled, and then kind of get some more boots on the ground and see what we can find.
Yeah, and I do put a lot of stock in what you're saying of the coastlines have changed, because a couple of years ago I was at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Festival that they have in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area, and there was a gentleman who does underwater photography, and he was talking about how if you scuba dive right there in the Straits of Mackinac, there's actually evidence of where a ancient waterfall was.
Oh yeah. Sure.
And so that actually is completely filled in with water now, because you have to take a ferry out from like Mackinac City or St. Ignace to Mackinac Island. But he said that there's evidence that there was actually a waterfall there probably about a century ago, or a couple centuries ago, and it's still there, but it's all filled in with water now. It's not just a waterfall.
And if you look at Lake Huron, they've identified what they call the Caribou Trail. They call it underneath Lake Huron now, where it looks like somebody had actually made, I think it was rocks and that type of stuff, to try to get the caribou to go a certain way as they hunted them. At the lower end of Lake Huron, there's also what's called the Sunken Forest that's over 7,000 years old. There's actually a forest there.
Yes.
Yep, that's been identified. So yeah, the levels have changed. And when we do research on history, it's too easy for people to have the mindset of the way things look today when you look about yourself, and you can't do that. You've got to put your mindset in the period of the people you're looking for and what it looked like then. Why would they have been here? Why would they have been there? Because things were different then.
Right.
And a lot of times people don't do that when they're looking at research. So.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and this is kind of my thought is with the Great Lakes and how they've changed over the centuries. It's kind of like when you have mud puddles after a thunderstorm. Every time those dry, and you get another thunderstorm comes in, the mud puddles are not going to look the same. They're going to have a different shape to them because of deterioration
Exactly.
or rainfall. So it's always, water is a great manipulator of things, and how it designs and carves.
Yeah. And in this area, we have the impact of the glaciers. I talked about isostatic rebound is because of the weight of the glaciers. Once they were gone, the ground has actually risen. Okay, and it's still rising today. If you were to draw a line from roughly Mackinac Island down to the southwest corner of Michigan, down around St. Joe in that area, the entire state of Michigan is actually rising and lifting and tipping from up from the northern end and down from the southern end to this day still. Eventually, Lake Michigan will actually drain down into the Mississippi.
Yeah, the glaciers are really interesting and one of the things I found when I was researching my book on lake monsters and odd creatures, because I was trying to get a more complete look at the fossil records. And unfortunately, when the glaciers came through, they wiped everything on land down south. So we have no way of telling what was walking on Michigan soil or swimming in the Great Lakes. Because of the glaciers, they scraped everything away. So it's interesting how something like that can just it just has its way with whatever's in its path.
Yeah, it sure is. Yep.
So I know our time's getting short here, so I want to thank you, Rocky, for taking a moment to talk to me, and this has been fascinating, and I really enjoy this kind of information and learning more about.
I appreciate your interest on it, because it's always fun to talk to other people about it and get their input on things too. So
thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to let you get back to what you're doing, and have a good day.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah.